Well, hello and welcome. I once again always greet you in the light in the name of God and Christ. Today could be the day of salvation for you, but once again, we are just going over an in-depth Bible study of Genesis. We'll be doing every book, every chapter, every verse, and this is what I wanted to do as a give back after I graduated with my master's degree in theology. I feel like I need to put it to good use in some way, shape, or form, so this is what I'm doing. On the last episode, on the last Bible study, we had covered Genesis 16, where Abram had a son, and before that, the Lord's covenant with Abram. And again, if you go back a ways, we talked about the Tower of Babel, but we're not too far in. So if you need to catch up a bit, I advise you to check on those episodes first, where we cover those chapters that come before this, and that would be a good idea to get some background information. But if you're all caught up, let's just jump right into this. So I want to begin. This chapter is prefaced the Covenant of Circumcision, and this is the New International Version. This is Genesis 17. Now, I think it's important to point out that in our culture and around the world, really, mostly stemming from Jewish tradition, but again, around the world, circumcision is something that is consistently referred to in the context of religious implications. So if you're circumcised, you must have some type of religious implication that follows that. However, in our culture today, a lot of people consider it to be a health thing or a tradition thing that may or may not have ties to religion. And as much as I would like to sit here and discuss the nuances of circumcision, this isn't exactly what the Bible study I'm doing is set up for. So if you need more information on that, you feel free to Google that stuff on your own time. Just know that it is removing the skin from the penis. For whatever reason, this is where this kind of came from, the origins of it. So if you were always curious about why there is some religious implications tied to circumcision, perhaps this Bible study particularly will be able to answer that. So let's get right into it. We're going to begin with 17:1. When Abram was 99 years old, can you imagine that, being 99 years old, a crusty old man? Oh my God. But time was a little bit different back then. Anyways, point is, we're going to circle right back around. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, quote, I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Verse 2. Then I will make my covenant between me and you, and will greatly increase your numbers. Verse 3. Abram fell face down, and God said to him, As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will now be Abraham. For I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole of the land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God. So, a couple things to take away here. First, God comes before Abram, which is now Abraham, and Abram falls face down. God offers him a covenant, but Abram doesn't say anything. Abram's not bargaining with God. So it's very important to note that if you were in Abraham's position, what exactly would you have done yourself? How would you have reacted? These are all things that we should be analyzing and looking at when we're doing this Bible study. And please note in the first verse, walk before me faithfully and be blameless. It's very interesting, the word usage here, it doesn't necessarily say sinless, but rather that one, he has faith, and two, he cannot be blamed for anything. And that there's going to be a covenant that's going to greatly increase his numbers. It also establishes the age. Abram is not young. He is an old man at this point in time. And even if people were still living thousands of years, this would still be pretty old, considering it would be 1/10 if he could live 1,000 years, or 1/6 if he lived 600, which in our previous readings, many people did range from 400 to 1,000 years. So as far as his age right now, his life could have been a quarter over or a tenth over. So it's not as if he hadn't lived a long time, just because people used to live a long time back then. So the main focus is that God's going to give him this land. This land's always going to be his, for his people, and currently and after him, his descendants, this will be their God. He is making a covenant with Abram before Abram's death, with Abram's lineage, ancestrage, and everything that is going to come from Abraham. So it's very important to note that. We're going to move on. Verse 9. Then God said to Abram, "As for you, you must keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you, for the generations to come. This is my covenant with you and your descendants after you, the covenant you are to keep. Every male among you shall be circumcised. You are to undergo circumcision. And it will be the sign of the covenant between me and you. For the generations to come, every male among you who is 8 days old must be circumcised, including those born in your household or bought with money from a foreigner, those who are not your offspring, whether born in your household or bought with money. They must be circumcised. My covenant in your flesh is to be an everlasting covenant. Any uncircumcised male who has not been circumcised in the flesh will be cut off from his people. He has broken my covenant." Now, this is a very strange idea to present to somebody. But if you were living in this time period and you had nothing, what would you be able to do to prove that you were with God if you had a covenant with God? And it's a very strange and unique idea to look at. How would I know that you were of the lineage of Abraham? I could suggest that you get a tattoo, but anybody could get a tattoo. I could suggest that you scar yourself on your arm or something, but again, anybody could do that. And technically, anybody could circumcise themselves or be circumcised. The issue is that it would be hard to tell that just from looking at somebody, because most of the time people didn't walk around with their penises out back then. So again, I'm not particularly sure the choice in which this was done and why circumcision was the covenant that was chosen, but the good Lord did claim this. When many people think and say that it has to just be a child that is being circumcised, this is not true, because a foreigner could be circumcised. It should also be noted, and this is something very, very important, at this point in time, it's not an issue that slavery exists, which is very, very strange and odd for a lot of people to comprehend, because clearly God has no issue with people being bought. It literally states outright, somebody you bought with money, if they're brought in from the outside, and they are to be circumcised. So they don't particularly have a choice in this matter. Otherwise, they have broken the covenant, and the people who host them have broken the covenant, which is a really, really bad thing. My point being that there's a lot of people who want to tout the righteousness of God in the Old Testament, and they also overlook or choose willfully to forget that the good Lord has done some wild stuff, including permitting slavery. It could be argued that in some way, shape, or form, slavery is not the same way that we understand it, as it occurred around 300 years ago, which would be around 1700 to 1800 AD, but rather there are evidential statements that show somebody is offering themselves into bondage, and when they work enough, they earn their money to leave the bondage, or they become a bond servant, where they're tied to a family and they work with the family. Regardless to any way you look at it, slavery bad, and we don't have it anymore. We're going to move on. Verse 15, God also said to Abram, "As for Sarai, your wife, you are no longer able to call her Sarai. Her name will be Sarah. I will bless her and will surely give you a son by her. I will bless her so that she will be the mother of nations. Kings of peoples will come from her." So in the previous chapter, we were discussing how they were getting impatient about having a child, and that there was a handmaiden of Sarai's, a slave or a woman that was a servant to Sarai and Abram, and she wanted Abram to get her pregnant so that she could have a child. But God here is saying that I'm going to bless you. You will have a son, and this son from him and your wife, nations and kings will come. Verse 17, Abraham fell face down. He laughed and said to himself, "Will a son be born to a man 100 years old? Will Sarah bear a child at the age of 90? And Abram said to God, "If only Ishmael might live under your blessing." Then God said, "Yes, but your wife will bear your son, and you will call him Isaac. I will establish my covenant with him as an everlasting covenant for his descendants after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard you. I will surely bless him. I will make him fruitful and greatly increase his numbers. He will be the father of 12 rulers, and I will make him into a great nation. But my covenant I will establish with Isaac, whom Sarah will bear to you by this time next year." When he had finished speaking with Abraham, God went up from him. Now it's very important to understand that this breeds a lot of jealousy. Likely the Lord knew who was going to rule and why they were going to rule because of the things that they did, the thoughts that they had, the moral compass that they had. Any innumerable explanation could be applied here, but very clearly God wanted Isaac to be the nation. But Ishmael was not going to be left out. He was going to be the father of 12 rulers. I will make him into a great nation. However, you have a great nation versus literally God's people, right? And it's jealousy worthy a little bit. It breeds jealousy, and it will likely cause issues later. Without spoiler alerts going off here, the point is, because Abraham had no word, received no word, was never told, "Hey, you should hang on and not have a kid." He had a kid, and then God made a covenant with a different child, causing duress and distress later on. Verse 23, on that very day, Abraham took his son Ishmael and all those born in his household, or bought with money, every male in his household, and circumcised them, as God told them. Abraham was 99 years old when he was circumcised, and his son Ishmael was 13. Abraham and his son Ishmael were both circumcised on that very day, and every single male in Abraham's household, including those born in his household or those who were bought from a foreigner, was circumcised with him. I don't think I have to go over that last part, but there you go. If you were ever wondering why, the reason eludes me. There is no proper explanation, and it's definitely not cited here in the Bible, leaving us to our own devices to wonder why. Why? It doesn't particularly matter. God could have said to Abram, "I need you to carve a cross on people's foreheads," and that may have likely had some crazy significance later on, but The point is, it could have been a square, it could have been a diamond, and that could have been the reason. But we don't know the reason for the circumcision. There is never going to be a real explanation outside of some people speculating that is at the core of the Bible. But you now know when, how, and where that it actually took place. We just, unfortunately, don't know the why. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Again, this is Old Testament, and we have plenty of New Testament that we can go over and live by. We live by the law of man, and we live through Christ's grace. We are not under the old law. Otherwise, you would have to be circumcised. Everyone would. Else, we wouldn't be a part of God. For whatever reason, this is the choice that the Lord made. But today, you can make the choice to accept Christ, and that's all you have to do. I have to say, that's a better deal than being forced to be circumcised. But hey, you make your own choices, and hopefully you'll choose to be back here next time with another Bible verse and Bible study.